My name is Mike Lee, and I want to talk about the future of food. And I want to take this in a direction that you may not typically think about when you think about the future of food. I'm not going to talk about robots. I'm not talking about indoor farming. I'm not even going to talk about lab-grown meat. I want to talk about biodiversity, and I want to pose an argument on why I think biodiversity is actually one of the foundational elements that's going to shape the future of food. In the 1950s and 60s, there was a revolution. This revolution aimed to feed the world. It aimed to increase crop yields, and it did. Nearly 160% is how much wheat production went up worldwide. It made food more accessible to more people, and in developing countries, people ate 25% more calories than they did before. It staved off hunger for about 1 billion different people. So this was the Green Revolution, and it worked. It worked really, really well. And the Green Revolution was really founded upon this idea of standardization of crops. The priority here for how we grow food was all about yield, yield, yield. And what came up from this was a monoculture. The monoculture came up, and it was supported by things like fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides. And I think the monoculture puts our eggs in one basket, so to speak. It consolidates a lot of our food system into just a handful of crops. But I think the more nefarious thing was that this idea of the Green Revolution also created a monoculture of ideas. There was sort of just one right way to grow food, and if you weren't growing food exactly this way, you were kind of off to the side and you were a little bit niche. And you could see this show up in the grocery stores too, and you might say, well, how did we get a monoculture when we have 80,000 SKUs in the grocery store? There's all of this diverse selection that we have. You know, we are pretty diverse, aren't we? I think a lot of that is largely an illusion, because despite the fact we have 80,000 SKUs in the grocery store, 75% of our food comes from just 12 plants and 5 animal species. It's not an accident that the term "we put all of our eggs in one basket" is a food metaphor. This consolidation of our food industry not only puts a lot of these different ingredients at risk because we have such importance into them, but it's literally just leaving flavor on the table. You may or may not care about soil health or sustainability or biodiversity, but you probably care about eating and discovering new and delicious foods. That's why we're all here. So we've traded off a lot of the biodiversity of our crops and our soil and our ecosystems for a diversity of brands and stories and characters. This is sort of what defined diversity in the grocery store since the Green Revolution. So like I said, the future of food, when you hear the future of food conversation, and there's been so many talks and white papers and things like this over the last 5 years about the future of food, typically the conversation gravitates towards some of these things like indoor farming, lab-grown meat, plant-based protein, autonomous delivery, things like that. And certainly high-tech things like this will define a big part of the future of our food, and it behooves us to pay attention to it. But something low-tech is also going to really define it as well. Something low-tech like biodiversity. It's not a high-tech, flashy thing, yet it has a huge importance to our ecosystem and the future of our planet, and the future of our flavor, to be honest with you. So my organization, we wanted to do something about this, and we started at the Winter Show. We created a pop-up exhibit all about biodiversity. We tried to re-engineer what a grocery shelf might look like if you made it more biodiverse. So instead of a cereal aisle having everything just being made out of wheat and sugar, how do you kind of take a wider swath of ingredients from different places and different regions and add resilience through that diversity to the average grocery set? We also started creating conceptual products, some of which we're taking to market and commercializing, but we wanted to reimagine kind of familiar foods using more biodiverse ingredients that have more interesting kind of stories, like this product called Fonitos. It's a puffed cracker snack, and essentially it's made out of fonio, which is a grain from West Africa, really drought resistant, really has great value for nutrition in the local area, and it grows really well in challenging climates. And not only that, but it really supports those local economies and those smallholder farmers. How do you kind of take an ingredient like that and recontextualize it into something that might feel very familiar and sort of mass? Or we had a conceptual product called banana B-sides. 95% of our banana exports right now are all made out of one species of banana, which is called the Cavendish banana. And there's a fungus that's attacking it right now called Panama disease. So, people are actively trying to tackle this problem because there's sort of an Irish potato famine-like situation around the monoculture of bananas we have. Despite the fact that this is the one banana that is the most popular banana in the world, there's over 1,000 cultivars of bananas out there. 1,000 cultivars out there. So again, you may or may not care about the plight of the banana and the sustainability of the banana, but you're literally leaving 999 different flavors and experiences out there that you're not exploring. How can we take some of those and kind of blend them together and create a frozen dessert, say, right? So we're always looking for these kind of commercial mass solutions that feel familiar, almost feel kind of mundane and kind of like they've been there this whole time, but reload them with better ingredients and better stories that are based on things like biodiversity. So one of the brands that we are currently working on heavily right now is a brand that we call Varietal. And Varietal is really looking at deliciously simple snacks that connect soil health with flavor. Our motto is that better soils equals better snacks. And we want to lead with flavor first for a number of reasons. Well, first off, we know that the world has a lot of different issues around climate change, water quality, soil health. Much ink has been spilled talking about these problems, and increasingly the connection between these issues and agriculture is becoming more and more apparent to people. There's a lot of logical solutions on how you can kind of re-engineer the agricultural system to chip away at some of these problems like climate change and water quality. But you would think that despite all these logical solutions, why aren't we just eating differently? Why aren't we eating in this more logical way and kind of solving climate change and things like that? The thing about food is that, and this is what keeps me up at night, is that food is the perfect confluence of logic and emotion. Food is not nuclear science where logic prevails. There's no emotion really involved in trying to design a nuclear reactor. Food is the opposite. Food is logic as well. You have to have the science, you have to know what you're doing with the food, but you also have to sell food emotionally. And if you can't speak both languages, you're going to be hindered in how well you can kind of get ideas out to the market. So in Europe, there was a study conducted a few years ago. It was called the Pan-European Survey of Consumer Attitudes to Food, Nutrition, and Health. And essentially they looked at Europe and the United States and they said, what drives food choices? Now, there's probably no surprises on here, and that's meaningful, right? I think it's the things you might expect: quality, freshness, flavor, nutrition, weight concerns, convenience. These are all the typical things that I don't think anyone's surprised by this. Even when you look at kind of interest levels on Google Trends, so this is an interest level search of a couple search terms. So you look at sustainability, climate change, plant-based diets. Those are all sort of compressed at the bottom. That red spike there for climate change was the week that the United States pulled out of the Paris Agreement, so that was pretty cool. But then above that, you see bacon. There is nothing altruistic about bacon. Bacon is pure selfish hedonism. Bacon is about me. Climate change is about you and the world. The ketogenic diet, again, it's about me and my nutrition. So despite the fact, and this was sort of a moment of truth where I had to be honest, despite the fact that I think we all want to support sustainability, I don't think you'll find anyone that says I actively want to destroy the planet. When it comes to food choices, climate change doesn't always hit the top of your mind when you're coming home late at night at work and you have two screaming kids at home and you're in the aisle of the supermarket. Is anyone really saying, I'm going to solve climate change right now? When asked, consumers generally express concern about sustainability issues and would like to be informed about them. However, in the context of food and drink purchases, sustainability issues are not a priority. Now, we can resist this fact and say, well, this is not the way it should be, or we can lean into it and say, okay, this is how people think. How do we work with this? How do we work with this and rethink how we market sustainable food? Raise your hand if anyone here has ever had one of your favorite meals ever, and after this meal, you're just in a state of bliss, and you lean back in your chair and you say, Oh my God, that was so sustainable. So this is a problem, right? Despite our head wanting to be sustainable, and us wanting to support kind of altruistic things like climate change, when it comes down to food choices, we act emotionally. We gravitate towards that bacon. We gravitate towards the thing that just makes us feel good in the now. And the question for me is, what does sustainability taste like? What does sustainable food taste like versus not sustainable food? Does anybody know that? And it's a rhetorical question, but for us it was a challenge to say, how can we kind of make that connection to say stuff that's grown sustainably translates into better flavor, better nutrition, things that are beneficial for the selfish needs, but also beneficial for the altruistic needs. So the blueprint for this has been under our noses for a very long time. Now, take a step out of the CPG world and look in the restaurant world. This idea of farm-to-table chef has been around for so long that it almost feels a little blasé, and we don't even really acknowledge it as a new thing anymore. But the idea here is basically the chef is going to a farmer's market, is going to a farm, and the chef is open-ended and saying, what's good today? What are you, the farmer, growing that's not only delicious, but is good for your soil, is good for your water, is good for you, the farmer? What are you growing that's good? And then I will take that into my kitchen and figure out a dish that's going to show that off, right? It's a pretty romantic idea, and there's many, many people from Alice Waters to Dan Barber and everything in between who practice this mentality on a daily basis. Flip it around and you think about how CPG typically works. In CPG, we typically think of an idea, let's say almond milk, and then we go out to every farmer and every supplier we say, and we just say, I need all of your almonds now. I need them as cheap as possible, and I need them on a regular basis. I need a ton of almonds. And what happens is that something that might be sustainable today, like an almond milk, if it grows to a sufficient size, what have we done? We've essentially grown another monoculture. So why is an almond monoculture any better or worse than a corn and soybean monoculture, despite the fact that it kind of has a sustainability halo today? So how do we flip this around? How do we get the CPG industry to think a little bit differently about how we introduce new products and take more of a page from what the Alice Waters of the world do at scale? Could we do this? Is it scalable? So for Varietal, we went in open-ended with no product data whatsoever. Our goal was to say, how do we scale up a system, not an ingredient? How do we scale up a system, not an ingredient? A system that's better for people, better for planet. And we started talking to a collective of farmers up in Washington State and Idaho called the Shepherd's Grain. And they're a series of a couple dozen farms, and they're all grain farmers. And just like Alice Waters would at the farmer's market, we said to them, what do you need to grow to keep your soil healthy? What do you need to grow to keep your water clean? What do you need to grow in different combinations that'll make sure that everything you're growing is coming out of the ground delicious and plentiful? And they were a little bit confused because I think farmers have been trained to sort of say, I don't understand what you're saying. Just tell me what you need. Tell me what you need. They were waiting almost for me to say, which wheat do you want all the time? And we flipped it around and we said, no, we want to hear what you need to grow for the environment. So we took that, and these guys are all really great farmers. They're no-till, great farmers that take really good care of the soil. And there's many things you can do to take care of the soil really well. A crop rotation is one of those things. So instead of planting a monoculture where you're planting wheat every single year, wheat, and what that does is it sucks out all the nutrients from the soil. It reduces the resilience that crop has to things like pests and herbicides and things like that. And instead, you're growing different crops every season that are complementary. I think of these different crops in a crop rotation as sort of superheroes that kind of work together to keep soil naturally healthy, food very productive. There's many benefits, from preventing soil depletion to maintaining soil fertility, reducing erosion, the list goes on and on. Every single farmer in the world, whether they practice this or not, knows what a crop rotation is and knows how to do it. The question is, are they incentivized to do it? So the Shepherd's Grain guys said, all right, well, this is what we do to keep our soil naturally healthy for grain. And rotations are different depending on what region you're in and what kind of crops you're primarily growing. But they said at any given point, our farmers are kind of in one of the years in this 3-year cycle, where a wheat, year 1, typically they'll plant a winter wheat. Great. Year 2, they'll see how the soil's doing. If it can handle it, they'll do another wheat. They'll do a spring wheat. Or they'll do a millet, or they'll do a barley. Millet's a carbon sequester. It's great for the soil, and it literally pulls carbon out of the air and puts it into the soil. And then by year 3, they'll decide, okay, well, we probably, we've done wheat maybe twice already, and so a lot of the nitrogen, the nutrients in the soil have been sucked up by the wheat. So we can either plant, or we can put artificial fertilizer into the soil. That's one option. Or we can simply plant a garbanzo bean or a yellow pea or flax or canola. And so that year 3 rotation is the series of crops that sort of naturally reload the soil with plenty of nutrients so that when they go back to year 1 and doing wheat, things just pop out of the ground really, really healthy without any artificial kind of additives. So they look at those things, those 8 crops that they grow in this region, as their rotation, and that's their kind of toolkit of different things they can use to keep their soil healthy and honestly keep the crops delicious and nutritious. We looked at that as a pantry. So we took those 8 ingredients and we said, that's our market basket. What can we do that we can go into the market with in a big, established category with ingredients that are naturally supporting soil health and things like that? So we took those 8 ingredients and we took 6 of the 8 and formed them into a cracker snack, which we call crop crackers. So we didn't get up one day and say, oh my gosh, I have to make a cracker. Crackers work really flexibly, really shrewdly, honestly, because when you're looking at a rotation, you're by definition trying to get a group of ingredients that's a little messier than if you were just sourcing one ingredient. Try making a loaf of bread out of pure millet. It's really, really hard. But crackers are sort of like the meatball of the snack aisle. You can kind of throw a lot of different things into them and they still work. So the cracker fundamentally gave us a lot of flexibility into the kinds of crops that we could accept from farmers that were rotating a diverse set of crops. It's also a $4 billion category that you don't have to explain what it is to anyone. And our goal was, again, like, how do we scale up a system as fast as possible, not an ingredient? And we decided to go after that. So this is one of the flavors. This uses spring wheat, millet, and flax. But there's 2 other flavors right now. Hard red winter wheat, also with flax. Flax is great. Flax promotes soil microbes and things like that and fungi. And basically the farmers say that any year you plant flax and then plant wheat afterwards, it just pops out of the ground. Dark Northern Spring is our spring wheat with Huntsman millet, and again, Bravo flax. Millet, again, is that carbon sequester. And then the yellow one, garbanzo and yellow pea, is sort of the nitrogen fixer. So you've got the garbanzo and the yellow pea fixing nitrogen in the soil and leaving things healthy for the next year's planting. The idea that we can scale biodiverse sets of ingredients instead of single ingredients is the thing that this whole brand is really stands for. And we want to say, if we can build this thing into a $1 billion brand, heaven forbid one day, could we kind of incentivize farmers to plant more biodiverse sets of crops instead of just fixating on one it crop every year? A lot of people ask me, what's going to be the next food trend? What's going to be the next hot item this year or next year? And I almost reject the question and say, I hope the next food trend is the end of food trends. Because what happens is we fixate on one thing and we lose the diversity of all the different crops. If you talk to sushi guys from Japan who really understand sushi and appreciate the art of it, they know that they kind of want to serve you a diverse set of different fishes and things like that. And every time you go, you kind of get a different combination of foods and things like that from the ocean because they don't want to rely too heavily on one species to feed everyone. And that's a beautiful way. It's a biodiverse way of looking at the art of sushi. Meanwhile, I sat down at a New York sushi bar and somebody sat next to me and he ordered 20 pieces of tuna. Right? So we have to try to get people out of this thinking that there should be a new it ingredient that's going to be hot, that we have to scale to infinite success. The other thing too is we have to start thinking further about how we market sustainable food. I think by and large, today the conversation on how you market sustainable food is people say, hey, my food is delicious, And by the way, it's also sustainable. We need to shift it to a world where people are saying, hey, my food is delicious because it's sustainable. Thank you.